Today, I'm going to talk about how to stop taking things personally. But first, we have to talk a little bit about why we tend to take things personally, which is usually connected to the experience of complex trauma. Now, complex trauma is exposure that usually begins in childhood to overwhelming events that happen over and over again, usually within our relationships. Now, of course, a lot of people think as trauma as what's called big T trauma, like severe neglect or abuse. So complex trauma occurs in situations that we experience growing up where we're forced to deal with big, overwhelming, upsetting emotions alone because we don't have an emotionally attuned, healthy adult to help us with our emotions, to connect with us when we're having an emotional experience, to help us soothe so that over time, we can learn how to self-soothe. Now, when we experience complex trauma, a few different things happen. We don't actually fully form a sense of self. Simply, we don't understand who we are or our place in the world. Another thing that happens when we experience complex trauma is that we have a high level of shame. We believe that something within us is wrong, that we're broken, and we feel unworthy of love. And a third thing that happens when we experience complex trauma is we don't fully mature. We stay in what's called an ego-centric or a self-focused state. Now, when we're children, we're all in an ego-centric state. We believe that everything that happens to us is because of us. Our ego is still developing, and we're still making sense of ourselves and the world around us. Now, in this state, naturally, we take everything personally. And I'll give you a simple example. Say you're 8 years old, and your dad comes home from work, really exhausted because he's been working overtime, and you run to greet him, excited, but he's too tired, so he kind of just brushes you off. And maybe later that night, he's losing patience a lot. He's getting angry, frustrated. Because you're in an egocentric state, you don't have the ability to think, well, my dad's been working so much to provide for us. He's really tired, so he's irritable. He might not have the energy to play with me right now, and he might just not be as excited to see me as I am to see him. And instead, you might think, I caused my dad to act like this. Something about me is making him treat me this way. Now, over time, if we're fortunate enough to grow up with a secure attachment, with our emotional needs being met, we naturally mature out of this egocentric state. We learn to look outside of ourselves and to understand the perspective of another person. So we don't tie everything that someone else does to ourselves. So I'll give you an example. Say we run into a gas station to grab a drink or a snack, and the clerk just isn't the nicest to us. So we can think, okay, maybe they just don't like their job. Maybe they're going through something difficult in their own life. Or maybe that's just the way they treat people, and it's not just me. So in those moments, you're able to emotionally bounce back from this experience. You can quickly get over it without taking their stuff personally, without making their behavior about you. Now, if our emotional needs didn't get met, if we experience complex trauma, we don't have this emotional resilience or that ability to bounce back or to get over it. And we start to take everything personally. Now, if you're someone who does this, you know how exhausting it can be to think that everyone else's behavior is a reflection of you. You probably start overanalyzing and overthinking. And you probably get upset really easily, feel rejected or extremely hurt by other people's behaviors. Now, the truth is, people's behavior is how they feel about themselves. Now, of course, we influence people, but the way people react and behave has to do with their communication skills, their beliefs about themselves, and their own past experiences. Now, once you really understand this, life is going to get a lot more peaceful because you're not going to feel slighted at every turn and resentful. So now I'm going to give you a few steps to begin to break the habit of taking everything personally. The first step is to stop the story. Now, this can be difficult to swallow, but the reality is we really never know why someone else did something. And if you're honest with yourself, you might not even know why you do many of the things that you do. But our brain loves certainty and safety. So it creates stories in order to build that certainty. And the truth is, these stories just aren't always true. But when we don't question these stories, we actually end up acting as if they are truth. And this can cause all types of issues in our relationships. So, if and when you notice yourself telling yourself a story, practice noticing, witnessing the story, and stopping the story by saying something as simple as, the story I'm telling myself is. Now, here's an example of how that could work. Say someone you're interested in isn't texting you back, so you start to feel anxious, and your brain creates a story that they must not be interested in you anymore. So in this moment, you might say to yourself, the story I'm telling myself is that this person is not texting me back because they're no longer interested in me. Now you've made it clear to yourself that this is a story and it's not necessarily true, helping you take that first step to break the pattern of crisis thinking, of acting as if the story's true and reacting as if the story is true. The second step is you want to practice asking directly. A lot of the time, if we experience complex trauma, we don't know how to ask someone directly because we fear conflict or we just aren't comfortable asserting ourselves. But the practice of asking someone directly is so important in relationships. It actually helps us feel closer to people or to set boundaries with others when they aren't treating us well. When we ask someone a direct question, instead of assuming, we give them the opportunity to bring us the clarity that we need. The third step is you want to begin to use this mantra. This is not entirely about me. Now, for the next few days, I want you to simply begin to notice how many times you make something about yourself. If you begin to observe yourself, you might be surprised at how often you personalize other people's behaviors. So the mantra, this is not entirely about me, is something you're going to use to create new neural pathways of understanding that every interaction we have is not solely about us. You're going to remind yourself in those moments by saying those words. Other people's stress levels, backgrounds, and beliefs are always infused into their behavior. And every time you use this mantra, you're going to be a little less reactive and a little less defensive by taking that pause to remind yourself that it might not be about you, helping you stay a bit more calm and a bit more grounded. Now, as you practice these steps, I know that you will be able to stop taking things personally. We really do have to teach ourselves how to do this, to break that old habit, because for a lot of us, it doesn't come naturally. We immediately personalize everything. But all of us can begin this work, and we can end up feeling so much more confident and so much less triggered on a daily basis. I'd love to hear from you listening. What was the most helpful aspect of this video? Leave it in the comments below.